In the 2030s, thanks to the rapidly increasing oil prices, Qatar's economy was booming out of control. This led to the country heavily investing in trying to combat nature's plan and turn the desert into fertile land. And for a while there, it was working. But then the oil ran out. By the 2040s, the sand was winning the fight, and slowly the city was being taken back by the desert. It was only those who could afford to leave that did, while the rest remained under the LED skyline that Doha was once famous for. Then, following the overwhelming sandstorms, was famine and government protest. And within no time at all, the military police were everywhere. They were trying their best to stop Qatar from being the next country to follow in the non-patrioted trend that was occurring across the planet. In the year 2040, a journalist called Kevin Bitcher was surfing through the dark net in pursuit of information around the no-pats, the soldiers who didn't have a place they could call home, who also happened to be enemy number one in the eyes of government officials. Suddenly, during the early hours of the morning, Kevin was contacted by an anonymous source, claiming to be the most wanted man alive, Oz. Oz was the commander of the largest known group of no-pat forces. However, Kevin had received messages like this before, and time again, it ended up being absolutely nothing. Or in some situations, it was government agents working on their anti-no-pat campaigns. He even once had a guy accuse him of being Oz. But what happened next proved that there was something different about this particular source. Moments after the chat ended, Qatari police broke down the door, accusing Kevin of aiding a terrorist. Fortunately for him, an approaching sandstorm provided a window of opportunity for him to escape arrest. And whilst using the cover of the storm to hide from the armoured vehicles that were looking for him, Kevin began to notice some strange messages coming through on the massive overhead LED signage. Through these adverts, he was able to see the no-pat emblem flashing through, along with a number of other mysterious symbols and images. Piecing these together, Kevin followed what he thought could be a way to find the no-pats, and even if it wasn't, he couldn't exactly hang around where he was for very long. Half of the city was looking for him. Following the clues, he ended up at the underground construction far beneath the abandoned football stadium. Outside, a man in his 50s, dressed in casual knee-length shorts, points his flashlight towards a tunnel entrance. His relaxed appearance and body language confused Kevin. What was going on? The man then thrust out his hand towards him and said, "Pyotr Guskovsky," and then in perfect Arabic said this was a one-time thing. As Kevin makes his way down through the dark tunnels, he wonders if he'll ever be able to call Doha home again. But as he found out, a year later, Qatar would become a failed state, and the city of Doha lost to sand. Almost 2 months after leaving Doha, the trail of clues Kevin was following led him to Alang, India. There he found a safe house made up of shipping containers, and inside were a number of heavily armed no-pat soldiers. After speaking with them, Kevin discovered that this group included a former intelligence officer, doctor, nightclub bouncer, and car mechanic. One of the men, a man named Navin Rao, seemed more approachable than the rest. He was a notorious Indian hacker, an ex-Special Forces officer of the Indian Navy. Rao explained that during the 30s, armed task force units started to pop up around the globe to help assist in moving cargo around the world and between the non-patrioted. All because countries were unwilling to help feed the stranded families, so the no-pats took it upon themselves. Unfortunately, these operations were about to become even more dangerous, and when the world's governments started to crack down on the no-pats, they began treating these units like smugglers and pirates. This particular task force that Kevin had stumbled across was missing something that was reasonably integral to the operation: a boat. It was all starting to make sense to him now. This is why this group of individuals are in Alang, one of the largest shipbreaking yards in the world. They were going to commandeer one. Unsurprisingly, after the Second Great Depression in the late 30s, there was very little to be shipped around the world. So the shipping transportation industry decided to recoup some of its costs by turning to shipbreaking facilities and convert their unused fleets back into high-tensile steel. However, Alang soon became famous for something else. as the ships destined for scrap metal started magically disappearing, and then only to be discovered months later amongst the ever-growing NOPAT fleet. And it was soon discovered that corrupt businessmen were using the black market to sell these ships to the NOPATs. Once the Indian military found out about this, they immediately began setting up patrols and guards in every attempt to shut it down. Intrigued, Caven decides to join the NOPATs on their mission. Navigating the Alang coast is an incredibly treacherous business at the best of times, and in the gale force winds that night, and whilst pursued by the Indian army, the gunfire sounded like it was coming from every direction. During their mission, at one point, Rao was struck by a bullet, yet he casually brushed it off and took the helm, piloting them around the black iron corpses of ships that blocked their escape route. With 25-foot swells, he navigated the ship with ease, leaving their pursuers far behind their wake, and stuck, surrounded by the graveyard of tankers. By 1:32 AM, the magic act was complete, and they had vanished far across the 21st parallel. And the beat-up old container ship, now unofficially named the Copperfield, began her journey as a NOPAT. It's been almost 3 months since Caven and the task force of NOPATs had fled the Alang coast on board the Copperfield container ship, and during this time they've been transporting everything from food supplies to computers and tech equipment. Their very latest pickup, 65 Australian refugees. Next stop, Singapore's Brani Island. It had begun around the mid-30s, when the rising sea levels had swept away a third of the commercial ports around the world. In an attempt to resist this new threat to their economy, Singapore built a seawall in an effort to shield their seaport from the massive storms that followed on from the rising seas. Brani Island was established and fully AI automated in the way of cargo distribution, and is one of the central hubs to the global trade system. Even though Rao had provided his crew with very convincing fake IDs to help them get through the scanners, everyone was on edge and completely silent as they approached their destination. The Singaporean Port Authority was renowned for their aggressive responses to any unwanted visitors. So if they did happen to sense anything out of place, the repercussions could be very unfortunate for those concerned. A specialist by the name of Casper Vandala explained to Caven that Singapore used to tolerate the NOPATs. However, things started quickly going downhill as more and more people passing through started throwing out the NOPAT sympathy card, regardless of whether or not their intentions were true. The US, who placed an incredible amount of value and significance on this particular trade port, were also becoming increasingly wary of losing this location, so they began pushing all of their anti-NOPAT propaganda, which in turn eventually forced Singapore to completely shut the NOPAT fleets out. They managed to dock undetected, and by using his OVP recon drone, Casper sweeps the area and is able to give the all clear. Rao began quickly directing the refugees into an old shipping container. Inside was a toilet, bedding, and enough supplies to last 10 days. Unfortunately, before they were able to get everyone safely inside, they were spotted. Almost immediately, a number of alarms and sirens began to echo throughout the port, and robotic security forces, called Rangers, suddenly appeared and began advancing towards them. Casper, wasting no time, rapidly took them down using his rifle. Escaping back onto their vessel, the Copperfield slowly departed from the dock, while Rao hacked into the automated distribution system and proceeded to drop containers wherever he could in an attempt to block the pursuing vessels. The Singaporean Port Authority followed them out into the open waters. With the sound of gunfire and battle cries coming from behind them, their foe seemed to be catching up on them. Suddenly, there was a dead silence. But then this ended abruptly, and an enormous booming sound from a cannon being fired was heard. Caven and the others braced for impact. Yet almost immediately, he realized that this sound didn't come from behind them. Out in front of the Copperfield, on the horizon, they see a huge number of fishing trawlers, container ships, tugboats, and much, much more. It's a NOPAT fleet. The Singaporean Port Authority is now vastly outnumbered, and immediately they call off the chase and head back towards the coast. The Copperfield has been floating around somewhere in the Yellow Sea for the last 2 days, waiting on orders from higher up. Specialist Webster McKay tells Caven that Oz generally only provides just enough intel to keep the operations moving. He sends this out via telegraph with only basic points, so only those intended to receive these messages would be able to understand them. Caven has been passing the time by keeping up to date, following the steady stream of news being broadcasted around the globe. As it turns out, there was one story in particular that would soon involve the Copperfield and its crew. The news report talks of an incident at Daesung Electronics. South Korea is one of the few success stories of the last decade. Their economy wasn't just surviving, it was growing. And one of the companies that can be credited with the bulk of this success is Daesung Electronics. Before the blackout in 2040 that dropped Earth back into the Dark Ages, most of the world had switched over to satellite internet. This earthbound internet service provider came up with a solution that would get the world back online without the need to roll out expensive hardware across the planet. This ISP was called KNet. By 2041, Daesung had 60% of all internet traffic running through its servers, which in turn flowed through to the quantum data center in the middle of Songdo. Naturally, the sheer volume of information going through this data center would provide a significant tactical advantage for those who were able to get their hands on it. So US and Russian intelligence networks keep a very close eye on what's happening here. At around 7:30 AM, an executive assistant at Daesung Electronics made out with 10 terabytes of internal data from their headquarters in Songdo, South Korea, and escaped on a stolen corporate helicopter. The identity behind this was an unexpected Korean woman in her 20s. Immediately it was assumed that she was a foreign intelligence asset from one of the two main superpower countries, the US or Russia. But what they didn't realize is that there was a third faction who was interested in this intel war. After Caven finished with the news, he headed up above deck. While looking over the horizon, he noticed something approaching in the distance. It was a black helicopter, and on the side was the Daesung logo. The entire crew has now assembled on the side of the ship. Suddenly, the helicopter appears to lose control, and eventually crashes down in the distance. Caven looks around at the crew, but no one seems to be particularly concerned about this, and a minute later it would all make sense. Above the ship there was a woman parachuting down. It was the Korean woman who had made off with the intel from Daesung Electronics. After she landed on the deck, Casper and Rao quickly escort her inside. She is known as Specialist Jae-Soo Paik, a non-PAT agent put in place by Oz, who's been working undercover at Daesung. Caven reflects back on his time over the months with this crew of no-PATs. The government had led everyone to believe that they were the enemy, but after Singapore, he was convinced that they were the sympathetic underdogs, making the hard choices to help the struggling survive. But now, he was witnessing them infiltrate international tech giants, beating the global superpowers at their own game. Perhaps there is far more to this group of nationless soldiers that we've been led to believe. Since leaving Korean waters, the no-PATs have been conducting a number of trade missions for Oz. Once again on the command bridge, the telegraph machine begins to receive a message. We will receive 5 containers. Get them to Kourou. Just over 24 hours later, the no-PAT crew are yet again conducting another trade, but this time with a Russian cargo ship. 5 containers are craned onto the Copperfield. Their destination? French Guiana. The manifest states that the containers are filled with Sensico GMO pineapples, which have a stable shelf life of up to 24 months. Caven thought this was pretty sus. Why would the Russians need no-PATs to move fruit? Yet, when the containers landed on deck, they made a very distinctive clanging sound. French Guiana was easily one of the most dangerous places on Earth, but regardless, 3 weeks later, they were there, unloading and moving the cargo by rail. The blackout of 2040 tipped the world upside down, and while everyone speaks about the internet dropping off, it was the military implications that really stirred things up. By having no spy satellites or feasible ways to keep an eye on each other, the superpowers were growing paranoid and placing huge importance on getting hardware back up in the sky. The Americans had lost the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida due to the rising sea levels, and rumours were starting to float around about them turning to the old EU launch site in Kourou. They would use this site to launch their equipment into space. However, Russia had obviously caught wind of these rumours too, and had been encouraging uprisings against the American presence in French Guiana. Specialist Maria Falk, a former combat medic, said sparking unrest is sort of Russia's specialty, and to be fair, it doesn't take much to get this place riled up. Caven could see by the look on her face and the concern in her voice that she was obviously a bit worried about what was to come. A week later, Caven and the Nopats arrived in Kourou. There, they were to hand off the cargo to the local militia. On arrival, Caven noticed that all of them were heavily armed with Russian weapons. One by one, the containers were opened and checked. Caven began to laugh, as on opening the first cargo doors revealed that they were in fact pineapples. However, after clearing these aside, the true intention of this delivery was made known. The container was packed to the brim with Volkov multi-munition launchers, Russian rocket launchers. But before anyone could say a word, the sound of gunfire began to echo around them, and American troops started flooding into the area. While trying to duck for cover, Caven was struck by a bullet, causing him to immediately pass out. By the time he awoke, he was on the back of a flatbed truck and escaping the battlefield. His wounds were being tended to by Maria, who was frantically wrapping bandages around the gunshot wound to his abdomen. While fleeing the war zone, Caven ended up on board a ship that was heading toward Russia's oil station on Antarctica. With the rapidly rising sea levels, by 2039, countries were finally starting to understand the importance of leaving Antarctica and its ice alone. Everyone except the Russians, who, in secret, were violating the international treaty that was protecting the ice continent from drilling. Eventually, over time, the remote science facility, located at Queen Maudland, quietly became a refining operation, responsible for up to 4,000 barrels of crude oil daily. It was here that Nopats from across the globe would visit this area to refuel. However, recently, things were beginning to change. As the fight for control and dominance between Russia and America continued to grow, the superpowers were looking for ways in which to bolster their influence. And now, the oil was being cut off to the Nopats. The only way now to get it from this facility is to swear allegiance to Russia. This was a price that Oz is unwilling to pay. Now stranded on the continent with nothing much to do, Caven stumbles across another Nopat specialist, this one by the name of Konstantin Angel, whose own vessel has been stuck here for 3 weeks. Angel states that this is practically a hostage situation, and that ultimately, war is coming. It's only a matter of time until America comes for this place. As more time passes, more and more Nopat vessels are winding up stranded here, debating the offer of fuel for fealty. The cold and isolation is crippling, and many take the bargain. Witness to this, Angel comments on how short-sighted this is, that Nopats shouldn't be choosing sides. He says to think of Poland in World War I. Their country hadn't been on the map for 150 years. The Polish Legion did whatever for whomever to make sure that when the dust settled, they still had a country. Sometimes war is the only way home. Caven begins to recognize this rallying call to arms. It's something that Oz has been saying for a long time, and it ultimately works to keep his Nopats intact and on mission. Suddenly, loud foghorns sound, and on the horizon, a large American destroyer can be seen making its way towards the facility. This is quickly followed by the sound of 2 large cannons being fired from the shore. The American ship returns a warning shot, and over a loudspeaker, a confident voice orders the Russians to stand down The flag the ship is flying is the NOPAT emblem. Later, Caven would find out that Oz had sent his most trusted captain to rescue the stranded NOPATs before they succumbed to the Russian demands. Caven made his way aboard the ship along with the other refugees. In his head echoed what Angel had said, and all he could hear was those words being repeated over and over again. There was a fight coming, and it was something he wanted no part in. Yet there he was, stranded aboard a warship. Maybe Oz is right, and war is the only way home. The MFS 04 Exodus is an R. Burke class destroyer under the command of a former US Marine. Caven is in his barracks packing up his things as the warship heads towards Freetown Port. Once there, he plans on flying to Cairo and take up a position with Synsico Agritech's corporate communications. Synsico were responsible for using a private army to put a stop to riots outside their walls last year. They're also the ones who provided containers of pineapples that made a clang sound. Caven has had enough. After 13 months of travelling around the globe, fearing for his life 24 hours a day, he is ready to leave the NOPATs behind. He started this journey wanting to learn more about them, but not to die as one, and that this may be the last opportunity he gets to leave. Caven's home is gone, taken by the sands, but Egypt is one of the few countries to come out on top during this time. In 2038, as traditional bread production was failing, Synsico Agritech came up with a two-part system to replace it. The first part included genetically modified crops that were able to thrive in dry and barren environments. The second part was a revolutionary desert irrigation project. The reason Synsico decided that Egypt was the best place for this farm was because of the nation's view on NOPATs. Egypt is the one place on Earth where a NOPAT can lose the label and join a country. Provided they are willing to work behind the wall, they have a home. This was Caven's plan, to take up work and leave the NOPATs. As they sail towards the African coast, he continues to think about the conversation he had with Angel, that the superpowers were already on course for a war. If the 1.2 billion NOPATs were to get involved, it would only lead to more strain on a world that has already had enough. To make things worse, the NOPATs are clearly a fractured group with varying agendas. A war within a war is looking to be the most likely outcome, which would only prolong the inevitable even further. By 6:30 PM, the crew are finally able to see Freetown Port on the horizon. Currently, only Specialist Rao is aware of Caven's plans to disembark, but soon this wouldn't matter. The warship suddenly starts veering away from the direction they were headed. Taking a left turn, they're now heading north. Caven can't believe his eyes. They were so close to the port. Why have they suddenly changed course? Where are they headed? He rushes to the bridge to find answers. When he gets there, he sees a familiar sight. An old telegraph machine, much like the one on the Copperfield. Oz had sent new orders. Before the captain slams the bridge door closed, Caven hears one last thing coming through the comms. We have one shot at a new future, and we're going to take it.
The firestorms began in central India.
50% of global shipping ports threatening full supply.
Mass migration has reached a fever.
This is clearly the greatest refugee crisis in human history.
The downed satellites have caused a global blackout of communications
And navigation systems.
Both Russia and the US claim the other is responsible for the
Players of the and Russia are both being accused of fielding armed NOPATs in an escalating
NOPATs, as these non-patrioted call them.
The Exodus has been rerouted to England. Now a failed state, London is under 3 feet of water. It's still a mystery as to why Oz has directed the Nopats to this area. Regardless, Captain Kimball Irish Graves went ashore to rendezvous with a contact.
Oz, I'm at the drop. Good. The informant has arrived.
Fuck! Ambush.
That briefcase is our ace card. Do not fail us, Captain.
Usually I know what I'm risking my neck for.
Usually, I don't explain myself.
Shit. There you are.
Irish returned to the ship with an injured soldier, a briefcase, and instructions to meet Oz's men somewhere in the seas south of Europe. The plan was simple: hand over the extracted intel and await the next set of orders from Oz. But after discovering the true intentions behind it, Irish had a change of heart.
Irish, you traitor. How much did the Nopats pay you to fuck over your own country?
My loyalty is with the refugees on this boat. That includes you now.
Irish, Oz is better 20 clicks out. I think you better take a look at something.
Listen, if you give Oz that case, that fucking terrorist will start World War III.
That's what they always say, Pac. Believe that shit if you want to. But I know what I'm fighting for.
Irish had originally joined Oz because he agreed with the need for Nopats to unify, if they were ever going to have a place in this new world. The main difference being that Oz thinks this can only happen if the old world dies. He wants a war. He wants America and Russia to burn each other to the ground. As a Marine, Irish saw firsthand what happened to civilians during times of war. He knows that by pushing a war like this, that the Nopats would end up being taken down alongside with them. Oz and Irish are both fighting for the same thing, Nopat survival, but are doing so through very different means. One was trying to stay out of America and Russia's reach, and the other was actively trying to manipulate them. This is what the intel in that briefcase was all about. Coordinates to an American secret the Russians wanted. Bait to draw the superpowers into an all-out war.
We don't have enough manpower. I don't think we have a choice.
Head straight into that storm.
That's a Category 5, sir.
Nah. That's home field advantage.
Oz's men are now hovering above the ship. Sensing that the deal was off, they open fire. Irish orders his men to steer the ship directly towards the incoming storm, to use it as cover. As men started flooding onto the deck of the ship, a battle ensued between the two factions.
This storm's a fucking cavalry! I'm coming!
Caven hid downstairs with the other refugees, but eventually the fight came to them. The watertight door that was shielding them suddenly exploded off its hinges. A blood-soaked soldier came barreling in and found what he was looking for. Leverage, Irish's 7-year-old son, Omar. Witnessing this, Caven knew something had changed in him. Over the last 13 months, through everything he had seen, he wasn't thinking like a journalist anymore. He was thinking like a Nopat. And now, there was a Nopat child that needed his help. Caven is no soldier, but he ran after the man anyway. Suddenly, he heard the American soldier that Irish had shot in London, Clayton Pakowski. He was still handcuffed to the bed. Promising to help, Caven didn't see that he had much of a choice but to trust this man. Plus, he had the kind of look in his face that he'd seen in a number of other specialists that he'd met along this journey. Pakowski managed to save Irish's son, but it cost him his life. On top of this, Oz's men managed to successfully extract the intel from the briefcase. After a year of travelling with the Nopats, Caven found the answer he was looking for. The Nopats are everything people say they are. Smugglers, sinners, saints, and so much more. The world created the non-patrioted, and then blamed them for its problems. But now this task force might be the very key to saving it. When the smoke cleared, Caven and the crew could all see the look in the captain's eyes. Oz had to be stopped from setting fire to the world. Irish had gone from Marine to Nopat, but he was still just a soldier taking orders. Now, it was his time to lead.
Only one way to stop this war, and that's to get in the middle of it. Put a call out to any Nopad who will listen.
36 hours to Doha. Get ready to fight!